Team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. I'm super excited, as I always am with all my guests, all fabulous. Super excited to be joined by Jake Broe again, and we've had a chat previously, and that was absolutely fantastic. And Jake is coming to us. Obviously, I don't need to really introduce him. Everyone who knows anything about Ukraine war on YouTube will know who Jake Broe is. And this is a particularly interesting time to talk to him, and I'm sure he'll get into that because of his past experiences concerning Korea. But we'll get onto that in a wee while. Jake, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me back, Jonathan.
Excellent stuff. Well, do you know what? I'm going to start today by talking about something that isn't to do with you necessarily, although you've had experience of this. I'm super excited, and I'm going to do a separate live on this, hopefully this weekend. It's a very busy weekend, but I just wanted to alert people to the fact that there is now a NAFO campaign up and running. It's just got up and running, and it is to support the 12th National Guards unit, a brigade who need a truck. Obviously, that's what NAFO do. And we have our own patch, and the patch is really cool. So I'm a big fan of the patch. Thank you to Chris Jones, who has done the design. And just to let people know, it's the 42nd Epistemology Battalion. 42 is the meaning of life. Epistemology is study of knowledge and truth, and it's all about accuracy, right? That's my philosophical background coming in. We have a book which is knowledge. We have the globe, which is geopolitics, ATP geopolitics, and there we've got the medical sign, and that's a kind of hat tip to Pete the medic who sadly passed away, and I met him in Ukraine, and etc. etc. So the badge is quite meaningful, and the wreath as well has meaning. So there's loads of meaning in that badge. And in that patch, sorry, it's not a badge, it's a patch. So that is there, and I think it's in the description below. It's an active campaign just now. JR, who's in the background, has already put in 100 euros himself, so that's really very kind, JR. And other people, I haven't even advertised this, and people have already piled in. So thank you for allowing me to talk about that. You've had the experience of working with NAFO, is that right?
Yes, I've done 2 campaigns with them. One in May and then another one in August.
Awesome. And so is that 2 vehicles or more than 2? In fact, you've done quite a few, haven't you?
So my first fundraiser, I turned 40, and my idea was, let's fundraise $40,000 for my 40th birthday. We hit that in the first hour. I underestimated the commitments of my subscribers, my reach, and within a week, it hit $1.2 million. So that was enough for 30 vehicles and over 500 drones, various types. There's the less expensive FPVs, and then the super expensive like Mavic 4s. I waited 3 or 4 months for the guys at the 69th to deliver all the trucks, deliver all the drones. We then did another fundraiser. I called that my 1,000 Days of War fundraiser, which the 1,000th day is coming up next month. That one hit 1.1 million within a week. So in total, my fundraisers will have delivered 60 vehicles and over 1,000 drones, plus miscellaneous stuff like socks, generators, anti-drone units. So it's unbelievable. My subscribers are amazing, and when I send out the call, they respond, and it's just a tremendous honor to know that I'm making an impact in this war in some way.
That's incredible. Yeah, and I did know that, but I've forgotten actually how huge that was. And yeah, so that is an amazing thing to feel like you have got to a point where you've commanded an audience to be able to, or not commanded, but you know what I mean. You have this audience that can contribute that much to something that you think is super, super important, and I think is super important.
Well, 2 things. I do think in my own mind there was a shift in May. Now that I have participated in these fundraisers, like those trucks I know are saving lives, those drones I know are taking lives. So I'm not just a commentator, sitting in my house in Las Vegas. I now feel like I'm a participant. So my mentality about this war has shifted, and that's why I also think it's important that people contribute to these fundraisers, even $5. You will feel connected. You will feel literally invested in the outcome of this war when you put your own money in the game. So my mentality shifted, but I also think people see me differently. I feel like I've gotten more respect or more access from other people who are participants in this war, because I'm not just some guy trying to, make YouTube videos and make money for myself. Like I'm
Mm,
actually trying to make a difference. I'm trying to use
mm,
my platform to save lives and
mm.
help defeat the Russians even faster. I'm fully committed to this war. I tell my audience I'm a single issue voter for this upcoming November election. A lot is at stake here. And yeah, I mean, I've invested countless hours making hundreds of videos the last 2.5 years in support of Ukraine. I want nothing more in my life right now than to see Russia defeated.
I I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. So 100% agreement. And this is at an interesting time in the war. Interesting is a little bit of an understatement. So a crucial time. I mean, we could have said this probably every week going through the course of this war, but we've got to a point where I don't know. You're starting to see perhaps North Korea more than perhaps the South Korean news agency and intelligence agencies, I believe, have verified this or confirmed it or claimed the same. We're starting to see North Korea involved. We've got Iran involved. We've got China. And the Americans today, the White House, I think today, or was it yesterday, have admitted that China are becoming more involved in actual weaponry going, so drones, military drones going to Russia. So we're at a point where people seem to be taking sides much more overtly. Red lines seem to be able to be crossed by these guys, but we're too reluctant to cross these red lines. How? Give us a sense of what you feel, what stage of the war you think we're at, and what your general feelings are.
There's definitely a lot of heightened anxiety. Everyone is experiencing this, and it is a complete consequence of the November election happening here in 19 days. Once we're past the election, unfortunately, Donald Trump is not going to concede if he loses. He didn't concede in 2020. There will be court challenges and legal battles, but unlike 4 years ago, Trump doesn't control the military. He doesn't control the Justice Department. He doesn't control the FBI. So if he wasn't successful stealing the election 4 years ago, I don't think he's going to do it this time. And we just have to get past this November election. And then I think some of these headlines will quiet down. It's, in my opinion, not a coincidence that Kim Jong-un is making all of this noise 3 weeks prior to our election. It's been 2.5 years. If the North Koreans wanted to send a sizable force to make a difference in this war, they could have done it a year ago. They could have done it 3 months ago. They're choosing to do it today, 3 weeks prior to our election, to allow Donald Trump the opportunity to say, I'm the peace candidate. I'm good friends with Kim Jong-un. I'm friends with Xi of China. I'm friends with Vladimir Putin. Vote for me. I'm the only one that can avert World War III. I'm the peace candidate. When really Donald Trump is just a dictator wannabe, and his policy is appeasement. Whatever the dictators want, give it to them. Dictatorships, autocracies are basically collegial clubs where, as long as you show respect to one another and you don't interfere with each other's internal police matters or aspirations for taking their neighbor's stuff, then you're cool. This is what Putin wants. And, if we want to get big picture philosophical, what is this war really about? And it's about Putin feeling disrespected. He believes that he should be the regional hegemon of the former Soviet satellite states. He's not, going back 10 years ago, his attitude was, I'm not trying to get involved in your business, America. If you want to invade Iraq and topple Saddam Hussein, okay, I won't veto you on the UN Security Council. I'll show you that respect, as long as you show me the same respect when I want to topple the government in Kyiv or, prop up the dictator of Belarus. So Donald Trump is willing to play that game. But real Democrats, small d, global, people who believe in democracy, know human rights and international law. That is what governs the planet, and that's what we should be striving for. I understand maybe half the world's population lives in autocracies and they have no say in their governments, but the goal should always be for at least the leader of the United States. I understand India is a democracy. That's the largest democracy in the world. But hands down, we all know the United States is the most impactful democracy. It has the greatest capacity for influence and change around the globe. The president of the United States should always be striving for that, we can call it unattainable goal, of spreading democracy, human rights, respecting international law. And Donald Trump doesn't care about any of that stuff. Donald Trump has only ever cared about Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I think there's this isolationist tendency that actually doesn't make sense when you look at. So on the one hand, you get a lot of people going USA, USA, USA. We want to be the best in the world. We like this kind of divine right, if you like, for the US to be at the top of the hegemonic ladder. But on the other hand, saying, well, we don't want to be involved in NATO. We don't want to be involved in Europe. We want to isolate ourselves. We're going to put tariffs up, etc., etc. And you're like, you cannot expect to be the number one nation in the world without investing in the world. So this is about return on investment, and your military might, along with a democracy, it's not an autocratic military might, but it's a military might with hopefully the checks and balances of a democracy. And yes, there is going to be this element of US imperialism that sometimes goes wrong, and it has done in history. And there are elements where I'd be super critical of the US in terms of foreign policy, etc., etc. So yes, but right now with Ukraine, they're on the right side. That is both the moral right side and the right side for the US objectives in staying at the top of the hegemonic ladder. And if you're going to walk away from NATO and walk away from Europe and walk away from Ukraine, you will not only do the wrong thing for all of these entities here and the wrong moral thing, but actually you will not be working for the best intentions of the US in remaining at the top of that ladder.
Well, you're making a rational argument, and at the moment, Trump supporters don't listen to any of that. The European Union is America's largest trading partner. Having peace and prosperity in the EU guarantees peace and prosperity for Americans. There are over 1 million American citizens living and working in Europe. Yeah, I think the safety of those individuals should concern the President of the United States, but Donald Trump doesn't think that way. And I'm hoping that we can finally put this movement to the grave. We're so close. We're so close. And for people just sick of it, I just need you to vote one more time. If you don't vote, if you stay home on November 5th, then we have to listen to this guy for another 4 years. If you hate what you're hearing right now, if you find this excruciating, we got 4 more years of it if you don't get off your couch and vote for someone other than Donald Trump.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it is a worrying time. And there are these inflection points in all over the world, because I think, there's no surprise that also what's going on right now, and we'll get on to Korea in a second, but also what's going on right now is that China have surrounded Taiwan with a fleet of vessels, including their own Coast Guard vessels that are like quasi-military vessels. And there's no surprise they're doing that right now. But this election period is on the one hand emboldening people around the world to do things to try and provoke the US into a crisis, and therefore that looks bad for Kamala Harris and Walz, or Biden-Harris. And on the other hand, the Biden-Harris-Walz ticket, if you like, is afraid of doing anything too overt about this, because it diverts attention away from what they want to focus on. So I do understand what that Harris is trying to not talk about Ukraine and not do big things for Ukraine, because then the electorate is going to be, why are you spending money on this, not that, and these really simplistic arguments. So there is that tension, and I think, as you say, this period just needs to end.
Well, when you poll Americans, what is your opinion on military aid to Ukraine? About 60% of Americans support additional military aid on top of what we've already sent. 30% are unsure or undecided. Like 10 to 12% are against or whatever. But it's not a number 1 or number 2 or number 3 issue for the overwhelming majority of Americans. They care about other issues more. So yes, it's appropriate for the President of the United States to talk about the top issues that people are concerned about. Inflation, the border, whatever. So yeah, even though this is a winning issue for Kamala Harris, it's just not appropriate to make it the premier or the number 1 issue. But as soon as we get past the November election, the focus will shift, the narrative will shift. People will stop talking about domestic issues as much because the election's over and hopefully Donald Trump goes away.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right, because the more you talk about it, the more it becomes a partisan issue. So the Democrats talk about Ukraine in a way that you should do, because it's super important for the US, but then it looks like a Democrat thing and not a US thing. And that then feeds into the idea that supporting Ukraine is a Democrat thing rather than a Republican thing, even though there are many, many Republicans who would disagree with that. But actually, the important people at the top actually that's how they're acting. So hopefully, things will sort themselves out after this month, after October finishes and we're into sort of mid-November. So what do you think? So assume Harris wins, right? For the sake of argument, I'm interested what your views would be on how they would do things differently to Biden and what justification you have for that.
Well, I do think that the restrictions on the use of long-range weapons inside the territory of Russia will change on November 6th if Donald Trump loses. If Donald Trump wins, it's nothing good for Ukraine. Nothing good for Ukraine if Donald Trump wins, and the allies are going to be scrambling because they have to deal with this guy. They have to work with him the next 4 years. Chancellor Scholz has already positioned himself as saying, well, I knew Trump was coming back. I'm going to do whatever I can to make Trump happy in this alliance. But if Kamala Harris wins and the Democrats control the House of Representatives, control of the Senate isn't as important because there are fewer MAGA insane people in the Senate. But if the Democrats control the House and Kamala Harris wins, we're getting another security assistance package, another $60 billion for this war to go another year. Assuming Ukraine, once again, this is always up to Ukraine. I'm not saying whatever President Zelensky says we need to do, I'll support his decision as the leader of the Ukrainian people. But if he wants additional military aid to stay in the fight, I don't think Russia can last another year. This political stunt, and that's all it is, of sending 10,000 impoverished slaves from North Korea to the war zone. The Institute for the Study of War said this might help Putin avoid mobilization. No, it doesn't. If you're losing about 1,000 guys a day on the battlefield, captured, killed, and wounded, sending 10,000 North Koreans just extends the war for 10 days. Putin needs to mobilize 300,000 men for this war to go another year. And he can't do that. He just can't remove 300,000 able-bodied men from the working population of Russia. They're already on the ropes. They're already struggling. Putin was smart enough to save up $300 billion to survive sanctions, but there's a lot of bad omens happening for the Russian economy. Budanov gave that interview a couple weeks ago saying that things are going to start getting really bad next summer. We all know how bad it is in Ukraine because we have, in the West, freedom of the press, freedom of the speech. We can talk about the negative consequences of a war of attrition. But we just don't get those reports from Russia because Putin is ordering everyone to shut up and be quiet about how troubled they are, how things are not good in Russia. But for ordinary Russians that get out of the country, something like 40 to 50% of the average Russian's take-home pay just goes to groceries, just to feeding themselves. Inflation in the supermarket is so bad. Now, Tucker Carlson will go to Moscow and talk about how cheap the food is, but it's relative to your wages. You can't compare supermarket prices in Moscow with New York City. So I'm rambling here, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think there are many indicators that Russia is in a very precarious position, economically speaking, obviously not politically speaking, but you do wonder whether there are more elements. I mean, who knows what's going on in the cloisters of the Kremlin and with the FSB behind Putin, and how many people are unhappy with where Russia is now compared to where it was 4 years ago.
They're all unhappy. I can guarantee you everyone in Putin's inner circle is upset that they did this because their lives have diminished. Soloviev had 5 Italian villas. Who needs 5 different Italian villas? You got an Italian villa, that's cool. Why don't you go for one in Spain or Morocco or something? Spread them out. But the dude had 5 different villas just in the country of Italy. So he's pretty upset because he can't travel to the EU ever again. It's all the oligarchs. Their lives have become infinitely more difficult as a result of Putin's ambition. And there was no need for any of this. They were all getting rich. They were all leading fabulous lives on Gulfstream jets and super yachts. And, Soloviev had illegitimate children with a WNBA player, in New York City. He was traveling in New York City like every other month. It's just absurd. The true life that all these people were leading, the super rich, the oligarchs of Russia. And Putin has destroyed their lives. He's destroyed all of their lives.
So
Who's an ideologist and they believe that they should reconstitute an empire by force? That's just insane to think about.
there's just no metric, I think, apart from owning a little bit more land, but there's no metric that you can think of that would indicate that decision to invade in 2022 was a good one. Just like I think it would go down in history as one of the worst political military decisions in certainly in recent history. Absolutely insane. But with regard to North Korea, so obviously you can tell us your experience of living in South Korea, but you have said, look, don't worry too much about it. I guess that's how I'm interpreting it, that, you know, you got 10,000, 12,000 troops, and actually that they need way more than that. But still, from a Ukrainian point of view, that's going to be a kick in the shins, right? A kick in the ghoulies, because quite frankly, you are at a morale low. You've been, you know, you're getting attrited. The West is dragging its heels, but as we said, because of the election, etc., etc. You can't fire deep into Russian territory, so those guided glide bombs are still whacking the crap out of you. And that now you hear that North Korea joined in the fray. So I think there will be a huge psychological impact, but also it could just be a wedge in the door that then allows, you know, further and further assistance to Russia from North Korea still, and then China. So I don't know. Am I dooming a little too much? Are you being too overly optimistic?
Concerning China, I think the government of China, I think Xi has been very careful not for the government to send weapons or take actions. Are there Chinese companies sending weapons and taking actions? Yes. Could the Chinese government be doing more to restrict that, clamp down on that? Yes. But China has had a lot of capacity the last 2.5 years to help Russia, and they've chosen not to. They're doing this for their own self-interest. They're trying to avoid sanctions as they're doing their own military buildup to attack Taiwan potentially in the next 2 years. But as far as North Korea, what spare capacity do they really have if they're a satellite state of Russia and China? North Korea is objectively one of the most impoverished countries in the world. And I think sending these 10,000 soldiers is not a move to improve the military capacity or capability of the Russians. It's once again propaganda and about morale. This is supposed to feel defeating for Ukraine or the Western alliance supporting Ukraine, because now it's, two nuclear powers, two nuclear states are now fighting against Ukraine. North Korea has a 7 million man on paper army. You know, how many of these guys can they send to Ukraine? We should give up. We should capitulate. We should negotiate. We should give the Russians what they want. Otherwise, this endless horde of, Mongols are coming to Europe. When in reality, these are the most backwards. In my video 2 days ago, I talked about the case of Oh Chung-sung, this border guard at the DMZ who fled. And this guy was 25, and he's the son of a North Korean general. So he was from a privileged family from Pyongyang. And he decided he didn't want to do this anymore. Only the best of the best, only the most trusted North Korean soldiers are posted at the DMZ. And he still stole a vehicle, rammed a barricade, and fled to the south. He was shot 5 times. He lost half the blood in his body. South Korean forces did rescue him, get him to a hospital. And the South Korean surgeon said this was one of the most unhealthy people he had ever seen. He had hepatitis B, tuberculosis, and his intestines were covered with parasitic worms. A 27-centimeter tapeworm was pulled out of this guy's stomach. He had been struggling in agony for years with this ailment. And he was 25. Wow. And he was the best of the best. And he was from a privileged family in Pyongyang. And why did he do it? Why did he betray his country, his father, his dear leader? And he told them he wanted choco pies. They don't have sugar in North Korea. They don't have beef. They don't have coffee. I mean, the privileged families do, but the average North Korean doesn't. So these 10,000 soldiers, I guarantee, are not elite special forces or anything that Kim Jong cares about. They're nobodies from nowhere. And they've been living in the cold and darkness, eating grass and crickets their entire lives to sustain themselves. And they've never seen smartphones, they've never seen the internets, they've never seen a lot of stuff. So this is a huge gamble to let these people
Mm.
out of the open air prison camp in North Korea. Expo-
Well,
they can't come. They can't come back. I'm telling you now, they're never going to be allowed to come back to North Korea because if they see things,
yeah,
even Russia, they're now contaminated, and they
yeah,
could, if they're reintroduced to the North Korean population, they're now dangerous contagions
yeah.
that
That's
might
a
talk
really good
about
point.
what the outside world looks like. This is a one-way ticket for these 10,000 North Korean soldiers. There's gonna if they don't defect, if they don't surrender, if they don't get safety, nothing good's gonna happen to these guys.
Well, so what do you think is going to be the answer? So Johnny Nedregard, so thank you for this, my Norwegian friend. Will France and Poland answer North Korea's interference? Well, you can ask that. Will the wider West, the US, so on and so forth? How do you think we'll react? Sorry, not that. That's a question to come later. And are we risking I mean, I already think we're in a world war, but we just don't really realize it. But for all functional purposes, we are involved in a world war that is global in scope and crosses loads of domains. But I've said that enough to my audience. But how do you think we're going to react as allies, if at all?
Well, the problem with democracies and capitalist economies is we only care about the next quarterly earnings report for our business, and we only care about the next election for our politics. Autocracies have a huge advantage in that the guy in charge doesn't have to worry about public opinion. He's not worried about his next election. He's already imprisoned or killed all of his opposition leaders and jailed or killed all the journalists that might criticize him. So it's a strength, but also, if we're being brutally honest, dictatorships and autocracies are incredibly weak and brittle. There have been lots of wars fought in the last 100 years, 150 years, and democracies win most of them. I understand, we have these images in our mind of Adolf Hitler and the power of fascism, the effectiveness of brainwashing your populace into going on the warpath. But when you look at the historical records of democracies versus autocracies in war, it usually doesn't go well. The reason why is because autocracies have to spend so much money and manpower and resources on policing their own populations. FDR in World War II didn't have to worry about the American people rising up and killing him, but dictators around the world, Kim Jong-un, China's a powder keg. If they don't maintain their great firewall and all their censorship, and the Chinese people actually someday wake up, that place is prone for revolution. Same is true in Russia. And I know it feels like the people of Russia are never going to oppose Putin or stand up to him, but based on historical precedents, Russia's had 2 revolutions basically in the last 105 years. Russia is very prone to collapsing and breaking up, and it hasn't been that long. I know in the moment it feels like it's been forever. It feels like it's been forever these last 2.5 years, but what if this war goes on for 4 years or 5 years?
I guess the idea was that the Afghanistan war went on for longer for the Soviet Union, but it finished partly because parents were so distressed about the body bags coming back, and that led to a bit of a public discontent with the Afghanistan war. And yet, actually, orders of magnitude more people have died, and Russia's managed to keep a hold on it. I mean, like you said, they're spending time and effort and a lot of money in disinforming their own population, keeping up a kind of iron curtain of information around Russia, and also spending an awful lot of money disinforming elsewhere. Do you think that they are more brittle than we are giving them credit for being? I mean, given there is also economic issues.
It's not just about the resources wasted oppressing your own people to stay in power. It's also about the entire structure of corruption. In an autocracy, everyone has to participate in some form of corruption so that you're complicit in the crimes
Mm.
of the states. You're not going to rebel against the state if you've also been stealing. Putin knows that all of his inner circle, he knows that all of his top generals skim off the top and engage in corruption. And he's okay with that. That is not a bug of the system. It's a feature to make them all complicit in the crime, to make sure that they stay loyal to him forever. Because if he disappears and is replaced by somebody, they might be held accountable. The problem you now have, though, is that when the economy or the country starts contracting because you're in a war of attrition and you're being blanketed in sanctions, well, all of a sudden, these regional bosses here and there aren't getting the same level of payments. They're not as able, to squeeze as much juice from the system to benefit themselves. And humans everywhere have this same instinct of, I'm not making as much this year as I was last year. I'm not doing as better. So these guys are all talking to each other. They're always weighing the options, and it's always about money. It's always about power. Kadyrov in Chechnya declared a blood feud against the state Duma senators from Dagestan and the province to the left of Chechnya. And he's just posturing. He's willing, if the Kremlin collapses in on itself politically, he's going to attack his neighboring regions and try and get more of their resources. But he's also just making noise because he thinks the Kremlin is weakening. And because Putin has allied himself with so many Islamic organizations and countries, Iran, the Taliban, Hezbollah, Hamas, Putin declares these all friends and allies of the Russians now, and they're Muslim. So Kadyrov is saying, I'm Muslim. I'm your link to the Islamic world. I should be more important. Kadyrov wants more money. He wants more resources. He wants more autonomy. Maybe he wants something from, the territories of Dagestan and the other Caucasus. So yeah, he's declaring this blood feud, wanting his guy loyal to him in charge of the Wildberries company. They're just fighting amongst themselves, and they're not actually. People did die at that shootout at the Wildberry headquarters building, but that's a prelude. Bigger stuff is coming because all of these guys are freaking out about their bank accounts shrinking rather than growing every year.
Interesting. And going back to the idea of everyone being complicit in corruption, that being a feature of the system, not a bug. Of course, we've seen this purge of top generals in the hierarchy of late. Well, I say of late, actually, it's been happening in a protracted sense for some months. And that is not that suddenly they came across these people having, evidence that they've committed corruption. It's like they knew this all along. There's just a time and a place when you remove people and say, oh, we've got you for corruption because we've got all this information, which we've always had, but now's convenient. What do you think's going on in the hierarchies of the MOD in Russia? What are your speculations?
So Putin is purging people, but I'm sure he's purging people on accusations and suspicions. He's not targeting purges to end corruption. I'm sure he wants to reduce corruption to make his war machine more efficient, but he knows he can't get rid of it. That would lead to an all-out revolt. So who is being singled out? Who is being held accountable? And it's always political. Who is not the most loyal to me? Sorovikin was complicit in Prigozhin's rebellion. Okay, well, Sorovikin, I'm not going to kill him, but I'm going to send him to Kazakhstan or some remote outpost or whatever. But then,
he went initially to Algeria and then goodness knows where. But yeah.
But Sorovikin had friends. He had allies who were generals in the Russian military. I need to make an example of somebody to reduce corruption. I'm just going to start going after his people. Most of Shoigu's top deputies have been purged now, been arrested. I don't know what Shoigu did. Shoigu's always been loyal to Putin, but these people are turning on each other, and I'm all for it. And it's never going to stop. It's never going to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark Bizku, thank you so much. He's a Ukrainian living in Canada and Olena, his wife. First, love and respect for Jake from me and Olena. Second, Russia is fighting World War III. The West is not even fighting World War III light, but World War III extra light. So there's a frustration there. I mean, what else do you think is likely And what else can the West do in terms of provision of weaponry and equipment? I mean, it's great to see that this $425 million aid package, and first of all, the US has drained the rest of the funds completely, so that had to happen by the end of September. But it's not.
No, that was that was the $8 billion under the president's drawdown authority. That's under the Foreign Assistance Act. That is separate from the money allocated by Congress in May, the $60 billion. There's still a relatively large pool of money available for the United States to send weapons to Ukraine. We're drip feeding. I hate using that word at the moment because we don't know what's going to happen in November. The Pentagon has to plan for the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario is Trump wins and all military aid to Ukraine stops on January 19th. Trump would take office on January 20th. So the reason why we're not giving everything we can possibly give to Ukraine now is we're trying to make it last. We're trying to make it stretch as long as possible because we don't know if Mike Johnson will control the House of Representatives, next year, and he could just block a vote like he did earlier this year. But come December, come early January, if we know the composition of the House of Representatives, if we know who's in charge of the White House, if we pass another $60 billion for another year on time this time, then there's going to be a huge surge, a huge flood in resources and equipment that the United States can then supply to Ukraine.
What sort of thing? I mean, is it just, take your pick of all the sorts of, because I got frustrated. I have been frustrated that the US, as well as being incredibly important for Ukraine, has also made some fairly tardy decisions with regard to things like Patriots and interceptors, and not the part of the package, the USAI part, which is the ordering from the US defense industry. They just didn't put the orders in early, and they seem to be like reticent, really reluctant to actually make those big orders, whereas actually that's what you need to do proactively up front, because these things take time to manufacture. So I don't know, I like, on the one hand, US is really important, on the other hand, the
United States is not fighting a war. The United States is not at war. The UK is not fighting a war. The UK is not at war. There's a difference. And what we're doing in the NATO alliance is we're supporting Ukraine with our spare capacity. For political reasons, we don't want anyone in our countries to feel any kind of economic strain or political inconvenience by our support for Ukraine, because that could shift an election. That could lead to far-right parties in France or in Germany or here in the United States taking power if we, took actions to support Ukraine that negatively impacted our economies. And that's sad because people are dying and the lives of human beings should matter more than money. But our political leaders do understand that if the economic shifts, then the politics shift, and that would doom Ukraine anyways if all these far-right parties that basically are aligned with Russia take over in our countries.
What's your view? So shifting it to Ukraine, so that we can give more aid, and arguably we should be lifting restrictions and et cetera, and sharing. One of the things that surprised me about Zelensky's victory plan is he explicitly talked about needing the sharing of intelligence, and one would assume satellite imagery, current satellite imagery. I just assumed that would be definitely what we were doing.
But we definitely are.
But I would have thought we'd be just everything, helping it as much as possible. But there's obviously areas where we do help.
There's definitely some intelligence that we're not sharing with Ukraine. If it would expose American assets inside Russia or Belarus, or undercover agents risk their lives. You have to guard U.S. intelligence very carefully, because if it's exposed, if it's leaked, people can die. People do die.
I remember the story of, and sorry to get back to Trump, but Trump let it known that there was to another international leader that then went back, and it actually led to the death of an asset. I can't remember the exact details of it and where this was and which international leader he just let it out to. And you're like, don't do that, man. But,
Trump stole classified documents and then kept them in a bathroom in the basement of Mar-a-Lago, unsecured, nuclear secrets. Anybody who walked into and there's firsthand stories of people visiting Mar-a-Lago, and Trump showed them classified information to impress them. Foreigners, by the way. And yeah, we don't know what damage Donald Trump has done exposing American citizens working undercover in these countries abroad. You know, it's shameful that this argument has been made and the American people choose to ignore it, and tens of millions of Americans are going to vote for Donald Trump anyways. I don't understand it. I'll never understand it. But hopefully, you know, Kamala Harris can get that 51% or whatever, and that's enough to get the job done.
So the part of the equation, which is what can the Ukrainians do to obviously, you know, give them the best chance of prevailing in a war. As Goose Princeton here says, how tenable does Jake think the protection of Ukrainian young men from the draft as we approach the third-year war? So that originally for the Ukrainians, it was 27 and over, you'd be eligible to be mobilized, and then they changed that to 25. And then there's this argument that seems to be raging at the moment that actually they should be eating into the 18 to 25-year-olds. Well, what's your view on that, for what it's worth?
You're an adult at 18. I don't understand this at all. I mean, this is cultural, maybe, but here in the United States, at age 18, I had to register for the selective services. Every 18-year-old man in America, if you want to apply for FAFSA, which is student loans to go to university, you have to register for the selective services. That's the draft. We've not had a draft here in the United States since 1972. So here's the thing, is that you don't want to draft people. You don't want to force people into combat positions who don't want to be in combat, because you can't rely on them. That was the case in Vietnam. Sending people who didn't want to go to Vietnam to go to Vietnam, it caused problems in individual units, mixing people willing to serve with people who didn't want to serve. But for Ukraine, it's different. Their country is being invaded. Their cities are being destroyed. It's a genocide against their people. I don't know what the answer is. I guess I'm not an expert here on how to appropriately mobilize a population, but if you're 18 to 25, you should be doing something productive for the war effort. I'm not saying sit in a trench and fire a gun, but working for the rail services, working in a factory, producing munitions or vehicles. There really shouldn't be that many 18 to 25 Ukrainian men just working in a coffee shop. If they're able-bodied, they need to be doing something to support the guys in the front lines, something to be supporting the defense industry. Everyone in Ukrainian society should be mobilized. It is total war. It's a war of survival. So the fact they've been dragging their feet for so long, it's not my position to criticize them. That's just my outsider perspective.
Yeah, my view would be slightly different. So, well, the way I would understand it, and I don't know whether this is the case, but my speculation is that there's a desire to protect a cohort of people that you are skilling up. So it's about, militarily, we're protecting the country, and obviously if we don't protect the country, it will cease to exist. But also, if we don't protect the country from inside, it will cease to exist as well. So the army's then protecting nothing, and we need to be looking to the future of the country too. So if we are just mobilizing people from the age of 18, then we are not skilling our population up for in order to have any skills beyond just being in the army. And so post-war, there's no training, that vocational, academic, any kind of generation of skills, and then you lose whole cohort.
In World War II, the United States sent millions of 18 to 22-year-olds to fight in the Pacific, fight in Europe, and when they came home from the war, they got the GI Bill and they went to university. To say 18-year-olds have to go to university and not when they're 22 or 23, that's nonsensical. I've been given this cultural argument by Ukrainians saying we shouldn't be drafting 18 to 25-year-olds because that's when they meet women and have kids and start families.
Yeah, that was going to be my next point as well. Yeah.
You can start a family when you're 30. A 30-year-old man can marry a 22-year-old woman and start having kids. Like, I don't understand. I never understood this argument, but it's not for me to, impose my values on another country and culture.
Yeah, I would imagine there'll be some kind of compromise if they are going to do it. So moving from 27 to 25, moving from 25 to 23, I imagine the most realistic thing, given the form, would be to just incrementally move it forward again. So a number of questions. So where should we start here? A little bit of information on North Korea, mate. North Korea has been remarkably stable. 3 generations have helped power by avoiding foreign adventures. There is a chance that Kim could regret upsetting the apple cart. I mean, remind us, or not remind us, let us know that your experience of South Korea and your knowledge of Korea in general.
In 2009, this was after the great financial crisis. I needed a job. I had just graduated from university. So I had a friend who had already been living in South Korea teaching English. And I decided to go out to South Korea. And I loved it so much. I ended up staying there 6 years. So I was an English teacher in South Korea for 6 years. I taught elementary school and I also taught adult conversation classes. But I'm very familiar with the culture and the history. And yeah, North Korea, the topic did occasionally come up. And North Korea is a prison camp where 23 million people inhabit it. It's the most Orwellian and controlled state in the world. It's the only country in the world without the internet, and they're never going to have it. The only way the Kim family, I mean, 3 generations of stability, when you're starving, you don't have the mental capacity to organize a revolt. But in Korean culture, I mean, their culture, their language, everything is structured to prevent the ideas. That's what George Orwell talked about, the Ministry of Truth or whatever. You literally get rid of the words. You get rid of the expressions and ideas of revolution. These people have never read a book or a newspaper or seen a film that allowed for any thoughts of dissent or opposition or revolt. It just doesn't exist. And it's been 70 years of, bleaching people's brains so that nobody will ever question or oppose the living God, Kim Jong-un. So, yeah, I understand why they're not rising up, but people snap all the time. We just need one bodyguard to choke Kim Jong-un out, in the night, and then we can figure out what's next. I don't know. Nobody knows where it's going to go.
So you have some knowledge about nukes, if I remember correctly. So Matt Kirk asks, oh no, sorry, no, he doesn't ask that. The question is, why wouldn't Ukraine build nukes? So we had this statement from Zelensky talking to Brussels yesterday, where he said, look, we've got 2 choices. Either we build nukes or we join NATO. We've chosen NATO, so let us join NATO. And then there's lots of talks, whether that's a kind of veiled sort of threat or a talk, et cetera, et cetera. What are your views on that, and whether Ukraine should actually build nukes, given that the Budapest Memorandum took them away from Ukraine, with the understanding that there'd be assured security by Russia, the UK, France, and the US. And in fact, one of those nations invaded them, and they probably wouldn't have done had they had nukes.
Everybody at the Budapest Memorandum knew that the person who might one day invade them was Russia. Nobody was signing the Budapest Memorandum giving security guarantees thinking that Poland was going to invade Ukraine or Belarus was going to invade Ukraine. It was always Russia that was the threat. The problem with the Budapest Memorandum, it was an executive order. It was an executive signing by Bill Clinton, meaning it lost all legal standing and enforcement when Bill Clinton left office. For it to be an international treaty, the U.S. Senate has to ratify it. And the U.S. Senate, I guess, didn't want to do that in the 90s and wasn't going to do that. And unfortunately for Ukraine, they thought, there was sincerity there from Russia. And there probably was from Boris Yeltsin. He had a different outlook on the future of Russia. And we messed up. When the Baltics joined NATO in the late 2000s, 2007 or 8 or whatever, Ukraine should have got in as fast as possible. There should have been no hesitation. Yeah. We could have avoided all of this. Yeah. If Ukraine had just been accepted in NATO, and maybe even the best time to do it would have been when Dmitry Medvedev was in charge. If it just happened prior to 2012 when Putin returned, all this could have been avoided. And if Ukraine was in NATO, Russia obviously wouldn't have attacked them. And I don't know, Russia would have to figure out how to expand somewhere else. But
Yeah, yeah. And what
it,
about Russia then? So, what's your opinion of the Russian nuke readiness given the failures of the Sarmat ICBM? So, the intercontinental ballistic test of the Sarmat, I reported this recently, as I'm sure Jake did. It exploded in its kind of silo, and that was all a bit of a disaster. And in fact, I think 3 out of 4 of them have failed. The Satan 2 tests. So, what are your thoughts on if Russia was pushed to a nuke brink, do you reckon they'll be all ready to go?
so the Sarmat missile failing is the failure of the delivery system, not the failure of the warhead. I'm
Mm,
sure Russia's warheads have a pretty good success rate. It's an ICBM trying to travel over 10,000 kilometers where a lot can go wrong. It's really hard to basically, drop a dime or whatever the expression is on a house or a building over 10,000 kilometers away. So if Russia hit the big button and tried to launch everything, they have 6,000 nuclear weapons. How many of them are deployed at the moment on a train, on a barge, on a road mobile, in a bunker that can be loaded into a jet? I don't know. It's thousands. What's the failure rates? We can be generous. We can be conservative. Just take the average 50%. It doesn't matter. What Russia lacks in precision and accuracy, they've always compensated for in
mm,
overwhelming numbers. So
mm.
that's their entire strategy. The United States would love to reduce its nuclear stockpile. That's what we've been trying to do with the Russians for 30 years. We'll reduce our number, you reduce your number. Russia has 6,000. The United States has like 5,500. We always let Russia have the most because that's a superlative they get to feel good about themselves with. We have the most nukes of any country in the world when really it doesn't matter. The United States is more accurate, and we have plenty of conventional weapon systems to destroy you. So if you want to reduce your stockpile, we'll reduce ours because we don't need these. We have 11
And they're expensive to
super
keep,
carrier
keep
groups.
up to. Yeah.
Well, it's a cost, but it's just not necessary. If you can win a conventional war, why do you need nukes?
I was speaking to my
Russia?
mate. I was speaking to my mate last night. I went to the pub to talk to my mate, who is the coach of my son's rugby team. My kid's given up rugby, and I was really upset. And he was like, he really wants him back. And we went to meet and talk rugby, and then it soon went into Ukraine. And so he's former Navy, and I was saying, look, what has sorry, this is a random aside here, but I was saying, well, look, what's wrong with the UK in terms of we spend an awful lot of money on our defense. We're one of the biggest spenders in the world, but where's all that money going? He said a couple of things, mainly pensions. So we brought that into there, and that a lot of it's pensions. He said, I've come out of the Navy. He's about my age, and he's like he's just come out and he gets a pretty decent pension, thank you very much. So they've had reforms, but a massive amount spent on pensions. He said, interestingly, nuclear didn't used to be under the MOD. It used to be under like foreign policy funding, and then they brought it into the MOD, and now there's this move over from nuclear submarines, the old class to the new class, and it's just costing an absolute bucket load. And then the old nuclear submarines that are being kept alive weren't ever supposed to be refueled, and then that's having to be refueled, and then so he's like, basically pensions and nukes, and then what's left over is everyone's scrabbling around to like pay for stuff. So yeah, nukes are just a very expensive pastime.
So same with the United States. Everyone looks at how astronomically large the US defense budget is, but how much of the defense budget is one, pensions, but two, healthcare costs for US service members and their families. The US healthcare system for the military is called TRICARE. The United States government has to pay for this. They have to provide free healthcare to all service members and their families because we don't have a national healthcare system.
Yeah,
In other
course.
countries, their service members just go to the local hospital to get
Yeah,
treatment
of
because they
course.
have national health insurance. The United States is stupid, and we're like one of 5 countries in the world that doesn't have a national healthcare system. So the United States military spends tens of billions, hundreds of billions, I don't know how much on TRICARE, just to provide healthcare to all service members and their families. It's free. Zero. I paid nothing for 6 years for healthcare, and I didn't even have a family. There are lots of people having lots of babies, lots of kids while in the service, and TRICARE covers everything.
I'm glad I mentioned that random aside there, which is just like, I went to the pub. This is what I talked about, because actually that's fascinating, because the US spends a phenomenal amount on its armed forces, on defense. Its defense budget is more than the next 12 countries combined, etc., etc. All these kind of stats that are often bandied around.
Well, in fact, I mean, for the next 12 countries combined, what are they spending on healthcare through their national healthcare system for their service members? It's just added in, and it looks not that dramatic, isn't it?
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Crazy?
Like, this is a right light bulb moment. So that's fascinating. Thank you for that. Just a few thanks if I can. Sorry, Jake. Just thank you very much. Richard Bennett for 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. It's really kind. Niels Clement for 10. That's super generous. Thank you, matey. James Cowley for 5 memberships. Thank you. Johnny Nedregard, thank you for that as well. And Kevin Force, as ever, thank you for those ATP Geopolitics memberships. A question from Goose Springsteen. So thank you to all of those people. Sorry for a gloomy question, but if the war has an unsatisfactory end, how do you both feel it will impact you personally? Do you worry about your mental health after being so engaged and invested in a just outcome? That's a really interesting question, by the way, and something I haven't thought about formally, but I have registered that we have to win because it's so freaking important. And if they don't win, like, I reckon I would really struggle with, like, the goodness of the world, and you know, shit happens in this world, right? I'm, as my audience know, I'm an atheist philosopher by trade, right? So, you know, we have to make this world good in the lives that we have, right? So it's the here and now, and we just got to make it work. And if we don't make it work, it's just more example that shit happens, and we need to work extra hard so it doesn't happen. So I think I would really struggle. How about you, Jake?
Perhaps I just was born with good genetics, in which I'm not predisposed to depression or anxiety or having negative feelings. I'm generally pretty positive about myself and my own life. Things aren't perfect, but I do try to practice mindfulness and gratitude. Appreciation is the ailment for a lot of, dark thoughts that can creep into your mind. And if there's an unsatisfactory end for this war, the Ukrainian diaspora lives on. Their culture, their language, their history. There's a large Ukrainian community here in the United States and in Canada, and now there's large Ukrainian communities across Europe. This isn't the end of Ukraine. It's just, another sad chapter, unfortunately. I'm sure there's been terrible defeats in Ukraine's history going back 300 years, 200 years, 100 years. Yet Ukraine still survives even till this day. So you can't just think about your place in history, your place in time, your generation. You have to think long term. But as far as an unsatisfactory end, I'm not done. I'm not moving on. Like, this is now, I think, what my YouTube channel and my platform is about. It's about global democracy and human rights versus autocracy.
I'd agree.
This isn't the last war. Iran's not done. China's not done. North Korea's kind of boxed in. I don't think they would ever do anything large, but I don't think the Kim regime is collapsing anytime soon. I'm going to keep soldiering on. I'm going to keep fighting as long as I remain healthy and fit and able to do so. And I get satisfaction and meaning from my life, knowing that I'm fighting for a just cause, a just world. Because like you said, I take that mindset as well. We only have one life. We're only here for a short period of time. And the only good, in this world is what you make in this world. I'm never going to stop trying to do what's right and trying to improve the world, because I think that benefits me.
Yeah. Well said. And so much more to say on that, no doubt. Andy, thank you so much for your contribution. Thank you for allowing me to do what I do by helping to support the channel. Sarah, now, talking about fighting, Jake, and you know this as well as anyone, because we are working in the world of information spaces, and we are working consistently against the Russians. I think we're in World War III or a world war, and I think part of this war, a main component of this war, in the way that it affects us, is the information warfare, where we are having our elections meddled with. We are having, platforms like Twitter be completely inundated with Russian interference. Propaganda, says Sarah, is spreading in the US by people like Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson. Can the DOJ do something? Are there treason laws? Just in general, like, what do you think we can do about disinformation? What are your thoughts on, we are not really taking a fight back to Russia in disinformation? We are not giving as much money to fighting information warfare that the Russians are themselves giving to creating bot and troll farms, etc., etc.
We have free speech. We have freedom of the press. I get this comment frequently, like, why are we allowing Elon Musk to spread disinformation? Tucker Carlson, don't we have treason laws? And we kind of do. But the problem is, in an election, as the incumbent in charge of the government, you don't want to look like you're cracking down on dissidents. Elon Musk is trying to claim he's some kind of dissident fighting the deep state or fighting the powers that be. So Donald Trump has committed a lot of crimes. He was under investigation or some process of criminal proceedings in numerous states, and it was helping him. These court cases, the Stormy Daniels trial in New York City, he was on TV every day. Every day he'd come out of the courtroom and say, "This is a witch hunt. I'm being unfairly targeted by Joe Biden because I'm the Republican nominee." And it was working. That message from Trump was working. So I think the Justice Department, the Supreme Court basically stepped in and said the president has complete immunity for everything. That's a dictatorship. But let's ignore the Supreme Court ruling protecting Trump. Yeah, the decision was, we have to just let it ride. We have to trust the American people. We have to let the public have this debate. After November 5th, all of these court cases are coming back, and there will be new charges filed against people who broke federal campaigns finance laws. Elon Musk owns his own super PAC, and he just appeared on stage with Trump in Pennsylvania to campaign for him. It's illegal for super PACs to take unlimited donations and coordinate with political campaigns. So Elon Musk even said in an interview with Tucker Carlson that he's probably going to jail if Donald Trump doesn't win, because he knows he's breaking laws. He doesn't care. The guy
he's just given $75 million to that super PAC by all accounts.
Elon Musk is having fun. He thinks this is fun. He thinks it's a game. He's trying to cause as much chaos and havoc as possible. The guy at this point is an anarchist, willing to burn it all down for some lulz. And let's say he is charged and then found guilty by a judge or a jury. I think the guy would just leave the country and never come back. He doesn't care about America. He doesn't care about our history, our institutions, our Constitution. The guy is a globalist. He'll pick up and go and set up shop in China and just live in China or Saudi Arabia or Dubai or wherever. He knows he's almost untouchable. He's so wealthy. And that's extremely dangerous. Everything that the right accuses George Soros and all those Jewish conspiracies of Jewish billionaires rule the world, that's what Elon Musk wants for himself. He's trying to do that. These guys are all guilty of exactly what they accuse the deep state of being or trying to do. It's just laughable.
Yeah, there's so much projection. It's incredible. Thank you, Petra Olsen, for your Swedish love there. Thank you for what you're doing for Ukraine with love from Sweden. Thank you, David L. Well done. Thank you, Jonathan and Jake. That's really kind, David. Cheers, Johnny Christiansen, for some Danish love. King Raccoon, good to see a NAFO fundraiser. Sure, things will get to Ukraine much faster this time. And I'll speak about that in just a wee while because it's already doing really well. Thank you for the amazing supporters. Now, I've got a South Korean question for you here. Where is it? Here we go. So Jake Broe, past 3 months, the South Korean media has been increasingly broadcasting on are on about the Russian war. Last month, public was more vocal in support of Ukraine. Do you think there'll be direct aid to Ukraine instead of backfilling the US and EU stocks? I think that's a really good question, because there's been this, and just a bit more preamble here, there's been this idea that, well, waiting for North Korea to get more tangibly involved could then trigger South Korea. But then South Korea publicly said, well, we're really waiting for Russia to give technological knowledge to, and the technology itself to, North Korea. That was what will trigger. So what are your thoughts?
I definitely think South Korea was trying to be careful, stating 2.5 years ago they didn't want to provide lethal aid because they didn't want North Korea to then provide lethal aid to Russia. So South Korea was being restrained to not provoke North Korea from helping the Russians more. That theory makes sense, okay. But North Korea is doing it anyways. North Korea is now directly participating. So I don't know if it came from the president, but there were South Korean officials who said that if these North Korean soldiers are spotted on the battlefield in Ukraine, they would then start providing direct lethal aid. And what South Korea has been doing previously the last 2.5 years is they've been sending artillery shells to the United States that are NATO standard. This allows the United States then to free up artillery shells in their inventory, and then they've been sending that to Ukraine. So it's a 1-for-1. It's an indirect way. It was helpful. But yeah, as far as other capacity, as far as jets, armored vehicles, artillery systems, yeah, South Korea has a lot because they've been preparing for war for 70 years. South Korea is a defense industrial powerhouse, partnering with Poland now to produce these K1, K2 tanks or whatever. South Korea is very capable, and there's a lot they could be doing militarily to support and help. We'll see if they do it. We'll see if they have the political will.
Yeah, they jumped into the top 10 arms exporters during the course of this war. They've also got huge stockpiles, one would have thought, because they've been constantly at war. I do wonder whether they're in some cynical, this is me being like super cynical, whether they look at all these North Korean shells going to Russia and think, yeah, it's good for us. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, if they're giving all these millions of shells, and those are shells North Korea can't use on South Korea, I don't know. That's just me being really like deeply cynical.
North Korea is making more shells. North Korea has been holding a knife to South Korea's throat for 70 years. In a fight, North Korea loses. I think South Korea could take out all their nuclear sites and prevent a nuclear response pretty darn fast. The problem is that North Korea has hundreds, if not thousands, of just dumb, simple artillery guns pointed at Seoul. Seoul, South Korea is the world's second largest city. The greater metropolitan area is over 20 million people, and all of it is within artillery range of the DMZ.
Wow.
So all the guns will just start firing, and it's going to take a couple hours, maybe a day or so, for South Korean jets to take out all of these dumb artillery barrels.
Yeah.
But that's all it needs. This is 1920s technology that North Korea is using to basically threaten the South Koreans. They know in a head-to-head fight they would lose, but Seoul, South Korea is just within artillery range, and you don't have to have accuracy. You just blanket fire on the city to kill as many people as possible. Millions would die if North Korea just started firing everything, which is what they've been threatening to do for 70 years.
Yeah. Well, as we sort of meander towards something of a conclusion, although I can talk to you forever, I just am mindful that you've probably got places to go. Thank you, Julian Rossiter, by the way, for your kindness. What's your opinion of the state of the war at the moment on the battlefields? You know, what are you worried about? What do you think Ukraine really need? How can they gain asymmetry and advantage? You know, give us your sense of how the war is going on the battlefield.
We've entered into fall. We're heading into winter. The days are getting colder. The days are getting darker. This just has a psychological impact on all people. Seasonal depression is real, and I can't imagine how bad seasonal depression is for a nation at war, a nation where 80% of their electricity capacity generation has been knocked offline. This is Russia's goal. This is Russia's aim. So yeah, it is important to do things that might not have an immediate impact, but are symbolic. Ukrainians just want to know that they're still being supported. They want to know that they're not, dying in a trench, and nobody's going to remember their sacrifice. So it's important for the allies to keep making these announcements, keep making these deliveries, keep making these appearances. It's always very important when foreign leaders go to Kyiv in person to show their support. But yeah, Ukraine just needs more of everything, more material, more weapons. Russia's going to break at some point. We're not there in the next couple months, but Russia can't do this forever. And despite the optics of 10,000 North Korean soldiers going to Russia, that's not going to save Russia. Iran's not going to save Russia. China's not going to save Russia. So things are going to get worse for Russia. We just have to stay in the fight.
Do you think that Ukraine has the capacity? Do you think that they are training up enough reserves to be able to do anything meaningful in terms of a counteroffensive at any point? Do you think that's within the ability of Ukraine? As Alan Doherty here says, does Jake think that Ukraine is waiting for spring next year or the summer of next year to go on the offensive, knowing that most of the military equipment might be in place to do so? I would say.
This is a war of attrition. Ukraine is trading territory for men and material. Giving up this wheat field, giving up that tree line, as long as Russia lost 30 guys and a couple of armored vehicles taking it, that's a win for Ukraine. The idea that we can give Ukraine enough bombs and armored vehicles to go on the offensive to kick the Russians out of the occupied territory while they're still economically and politically capable of regenerating, that just isn't going to happen. There has to be a political or an economic collapse inside of Russia for Ukraine to get their territory back.
I think so.
I said that 2 years ago and people got mad at me. This was right after the Kharkiv counteroffensive. This was right after the Kherson counteroffensive. This was before they were talking about, the next summer offensive when they tried to go into Zaporizhia. And I just said, if Russia still has the economic capacity and they're still conscripting, people are used to play. Well, people are used to playing video games, and you win the video game by going on the offensive and killing your opponent. That logically makes sense to people. But wars are wars of attrition, and in World War II, you bomb the factories, you stop them from producing more material, and
who's got the deepest pockets in terms of economics and in terms of industry, and Ukraine are lucky because they got loads of allies, but Russia's got deep pockets, deep natural resources, deep reserves in terms of gold, etc., although they're churning through a bunch of this, and they've got an industrial complex that can sustain them at the moment. But it is a game of kind of economic and industrial chicken.
In World War II, Germany and Japan were both more ethnically and culturally homogenous and unified than the current Russian state. Russia identifies itself as a multicultural empire, so the divisions are already there. These people already don't like each other. So we just need to light that fuse and then stand back. It's coming eventually. You're not going to see the signs. You're not going to see the signs until it happens. It's slow, and then very fast.
This is why I like seeing it when Akhmat are having a go at conventional forces, or conventional forces having a go at Akhmat, the Chechen sort of units. And you're like, yeah, brilliant, go for it. Because that doesn't really happen on the Ukrainian side. So long can these divisions be existing? And it just feeds.
Every oligarch in Russia is forming their own private military group. Every oligarch in Russia the last 2 years has been Gazprom and Rosneft have their own militaries. Everybody is preparing for the civil war. Everyone knows that based on Russia's history, a collapse and a division could come soon. And there's nobody who's going to help the Russians this time put themselves back together. Everyone's going to be saying, okay, we tried this. Just because you speak the same language doesn't mean you need to be the same country. How many countries in the world speak Spanish? They don't all have to be one country. How many countries in the world speak Arabic? They don't all have to be one country. How many countries in the world speak English?
Well,
We
I'm a
don't all
big
have
fan
to
of
be one
I'm a
country.
big fan of what the Russians say, actually, which is Ukraine speaks Russian, therefore it's Russia. So I am going to be getting over on a boat soon to the US and put my flag down again and just make sure that you guys know who you're owned by.
Depending on the outcome of November 5th, I would welcome you with open arms. Please,
Well said.
please liberate us.
Good.
I would love to annex Canada and get their voters on our voting base to normalize out the Deep South.
Well, it's funny. Like, Norway did a survey in Norway on who they'd vote for, Trump or Harris, and it was something like 90%.
Yeah, it was like 92-8 or something.
Yeah, incredible. Right, just a few here. Goose Springsteen, thank you so much. Talking about like procurement in the UK, mismanaged or short-sighted procurement is another big issue for the UK defence. We spent enough to build 3 carriers, messing around with considering catapults, only to stupidly decide no. I think part of the issue with building is we had lost a lot of shipbuilding in the UK, and actually you lose the expertise. It then becomes even more expensive and difficult to build the things you should be building. So there is an argument to say you need to continue building stuff to keep that expertise and the costs down, but then that takes a lot of cost as well to do that.
So I can give you an example from my career field. I was a nuclear missile operations officer on the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile system. The United States right now is trying to bring up the next generation of ICBMs, the land leg of the triad. The system is called Sentinel, and Sentinel keeps going over budgets. They've been working on this for 10 years now, and the projection costs keep going up and up and up. And the reason why is because we haven't built new ICBMs in 40 years. I think the Peacekeeper was the last one, but we decommissioned that. So there are no companies, there are no people still working. Whereas in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s here in the United States, we were pumping out ICBMs like sausages. There was a lot of companies that had the expertise, the people, and today it's basically lost. We just kept extending the service life of the Minuteman III so long. Yeah, that institutional knowledge is lost.
It's a bit like Storm Shadow and Scalp, is that we kind of, as one goes and you phase in another one, and then it turns out, oh, we need loads of Storm Shadows, but then to start up the production lines for that is prohibitive. And so we're in this annoying situation where I guess we really want to give more Storm Shadows to Ukraine, but we can't. So then France and the UK taking back, I believe, missiles that they've exported previously that are going to eventually get replaced anyway, taking them back from the countries they exported to, and then tinker with them and send them to Ukraine. So yeah, it's really frustrating.
Well, this is something that Zelensky asked for a long time ago, like a year or a year and a half ago. NATO countries need to cancel all contracts and stop exporting to non-NATO countries. How many EU defense contractors are currently fulfilling purchase orders from Dubai or Saudi Arabia or Egypt? I think that's absurd. You know, if you're in the EU and you're in NATO and you're a defense contractor, if the money's there, you should be building for Ukraine.
Yeah.
Why are there, well, there's American too, but if Europe wants to defend itself, it needs to stop selling weapons to Africa and the Middle East when Ukraine needs them today.
Yeah, I totally agree. Andrew Perpetua, your point before, how do you go bankrupt 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly? This is the thing, and this is, you know, what was likely to happen. One thinks with Russia is that, you know, it looks like they're holding on, and then suddenly bang, they go. Do you know of the work of Andrew Perpetua and Tochny and like what they do in terms of generating statistics and his mapping?
No, I don't know what that is.
Right. So, oh my goodness. Right. Andrew Perpetua, they open source is part of the Tochny team of people who are creating an inordinate amount of data on the losses each day, and also doing mapping updates. I'll send you some links to Tochny. They're definitely someone in the live chat was like, have you told Jake about Andrew Perpetua and Tochny? Because he really should get onto that. They are absolute diamonds for Ukraine. They do incredible work. Just a few more here. Thank you for allowing me to do this, Jake. And some questions do come out of this. Jake, any chance you can persuade Ryan Macbeth to come on ATP Geo for a chat? Says Julian Ross. Thanks for your support, mate. Ryan Macbeth.
Have you ever asked Ryan?
Yeah, that's it. I haven't. This is the first. Yeah, I should probably ask him first. But thank you,
Well,
Julian, for giving me a hint.
so I've hung out and I met up with Ryan Macbeth twice. He's a very interesting guy, but he says yes to everything. Anytime somebody asks him to appear, he says yes. So you haven't asked him, but I have a suspicion he loves talking to people. He's the biggest extrovert in the world. He's very jovial and convivial and talkative. So yeah, he would love to talk to you.
Yeah, I'll do that. So Julian, that's a really good reminder, actually. Mitch Mazarol from Canada, thanks, my man. Appreciate Jake taking the time to stop by and share his perspective. The fight in the information space is crucial. Thanks for making this happen, JP, and thank you, Mitch, for your wonderful support. And it's just everything for me. Well, it's not everything, but so much of what we do is about the fight in the information space. And I, this is where I had a massive argument with someone on my Facebook who was like, why don't you talk enough about Israel and Gaza and blah, 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 and how, Palestine. And I'm like, right, I have my views on that. And I've given my views, and I did a whole video series on that conflict, but it doesn't have the importance that Ukraine and Russia have in terms of geopolitics, in terms of, you can talk about like the breadbasket of the world that Ukraine is. You can talk about natural resources that Ukraine have. You can talk about the game of chess that's going on with BRICS and all these nations and North Korea and Iraq. Yes, Israel, of course, Israel, Gaza, Palestine, terrible things are happening and it's awful. But I don't have the brain capacity to deal with all of these things. And so this is my focus. In the same way, I wouldn't criticize someone else that focus on, climate change for not talking about quantum physics enough. We concentrate on these different things. I mean, do you feel that you are suitably narrow-minded? Do you feel that you even have the brain capacity to be worried and concerned about these other things and know enough about them?
I don't want to create unnecessary internal division. These are not connected wars. What Israel is doing, and Israel is currently being attacked by like 7 different groups. There's the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iraqi groups, Syrian groups. Israel has been fighting for its right to exist since it came into creation. And I don't think this is going to end or resolve itself anytime soon. And we can talk about mistakes Israel has made. Plenty of blame to be shared. But I think the positions of Hezbollah and Hamas are indefensible. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for the governments on either side. I have sympathy for the people. But what I don't see the productivity of making dedicated videos about it. It's just not something that I want to do because I don't think it has a bigger picture implication. Now, for people who are religiously motivated, sure, it's a holy war, basically. Yeah. Whether you're Islamic or Jewish, you care deeply. I'm neither. Now, for Ukraine, this is political, and this is about a land war in Europe, the largest since World War II. And the Russians are on the warpath. They're not going to stop. If they win in Ukraine, there's going to be another war. If they're not resoundingly defeated, this is going to embolden other dictatorships around the world to attack their neighbors. The international rules-based order for the last 75 years is breaking down. This is independent of what's happening in Palestine and Israel. So this is a bigger fight. This is a bigger picture. I think this demands more attention from the world. And it could be different in Europe, but here in the United States, I do think people pay attention to more and care about more Israel and Palestine than Ukraine and Russia. So the fact that I'm not talking about it, is there an absence of information that you can go to get about that war? Like, there are plenty of people here in the United States every day talking about Israel and Palestine, whereas I think there is less information for whatever reason here in the United States, especially about what's happening in the war in Ukraine. They just don't talk about it on the nightly news anymore unless something huge happens. So I'm being an advocate and a participant in my opinion, a more important conflict that's getting less attention.
Very, very well said. Just a few more thanks here. So, given Ukraine potential, thank you, X-Penguin95, for quick nuke development. Should the US strategy allow conventional long-range strikes better than Ukraine going nuclear in Russia? I would say yes, of course, they should allow long-range strikes. And it's annoying that they haven't. And I think, lots of people blame Jake Sullivan and anti-escalation.
Wait for November 6th.
Yep.
If the permission's not given on November 6th, wait for January 20th. I'm pretty confident at least by January 20th, the permission will be given.
Yeah, I'd agree. Goose Springsteen talking about Elon Musk was apparently deranged by one of his children becoming trans. That was a big thing that turned him like anti-woke and positioning himself where he does.
Can I give you my quick thoughts on Elon Musk?
Yep.
Elon Musk is never going to stop having kids. He believes he is the Ubermensch, superhuman savior of the planet. He's already had like 13 kids with like 5 or 6 different women, and he's never going to stop. It's going to be so amazingly annoying for the rest of your life and for the rest of my life. We are going to have to be hearing about the celebrity gossip and drama of all of Elon's kids. They're just now becoming of age, 18, 19, 20s. But for the rest of your life and the rest of my life, we're going to have to be hearing about the family bickering and the internal squabbles of Elon Musk's 30, 40, 50 plus children. This is a nightmare. This is unfair to humanity, what he is doing to all of us. This fight between him and his trans kid, this is just the beginning of decades of front page celebrity gossip, of internal fighting among all of Elon Musk's stupid children. I hate this man for what he's doing to the global world. Having all these kids who are all going to hate each other, all going to hate him, and we're going to have to be hearing about this drama and gossip. I'm going to die before all of these people stop talking and creating stupid. They're all billionaires, and
there's a really thank you for that. It's brilliant. But there is this thing where he is the richest man in the world, arguably the most powerful single individual in the world, in a sustained way, in a way that the US president only has 4 or 8 years. Like he can perpetuate his power for a long time. And he's now backing this particular candidate where if the election goes the correct way for him in November, then he will be the single most powerful person in the world, because he'll have a place in that administration.
Trump's probably going to kill him. If Trump actually wins, he would view Elon Musk as a threat to his power, and he would just kill him. Trump's going to start murdering people if he gets back into the White House. He says he's going to do this. He's going to use the military to destroy the enemy within. He's going to be a dictator on day one. This is his language.
Yeah.
So it's obvious to everyone, and especially obvious to Trump, that the tech oligarchs, the PayPal mafia, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, they want JD Vance to be president.
Yeah.
So whether or not they invoke the 25th Amendment and claim Donald Trump is, mentally unfit to be president anymore, or whether or not JD Vance or the butler in the White House just pushes Trump down the stairs one night, I do think there will be a coup in the next 4 years if Trump wins, so that the tech oligarchs can get their guy, JD Vance, to actually be in charge of the country. So in these power struggles amongst unethical oligarchs, you got to get them before they get you. And I'm sure Donald Trump has these thoughts. The guy is incredibly paranoid. He already knows people are trying to kill him.
Yeah.
I might be speaking too freely here, but things are going to get insane and really weird if Trump actually does win. But I think eventually Elon is going to spiral out of control and die of a drug overdose or something.
Interesting.
Matthew Perry was on ketamine and he drowned in his own hot tub. I was going to
say a bit too much ketamine, but you beat me to it. Okie dokie. I'm sorry for so little. No, thank you. Okie dokie. Thank you both for all you do. Thank you for your support. And they exist. Inspired by Okie dokie. Who else feels inspired? That's really kind of you. They exist. And last one here is Wee Bit Furry. I saw Jake and Ryan pissed up in Las Vegas at a casino in a photo. Guy's a legend and an absolute monster tank. Thanks, JP and Jake, for the stream. You got to ask Ryan for a chat, JP. Thanks. From New Zealand, Great Britain. So thanks, Wee Bit Furry. And I have seen through the YouTube YouTubes. I see photos often of Ryan here, there, and everywhere being Ryan. So it would be interesting to get him on.
Ryan likes to smoke. Ryan likes to drink. If you go out with Ryan, he is going to want to smoke cigars and he is going to want to get a drink.
Yeah. I think I've certainly seen that. Jason County, thanks for coming on. Jake, great chat. Nice one, JP. Thanks, dude. I just want to say this is quite incredible, guys. So just in this, so for my Wii channel compared to Jake's, this is brilliant because I haven't really done a live on this. I haven't talked about it, and then already we've got up to 14% of the NAFO truck just in this like incidental stream with Jake, or not an incidental stream with Jake, but incidentally NATO in the background. So that's amazing. Thank you, everyone, and please continue to do so. And I'll do a live on that this weekend to really big that project up. Look, Jake, thank you so much for coming on. Is there? Oh no, we've got one more here. Stupidity in Essence says, "I'm so happy to have you guys supporting Ukraine. I watch you every day." Thank you for doing so, Stupidity in Essence, and thank you for your Danish support there. Jake, look, is there anything you think's pertinent that we haven't discussed that you think is really important at the moment? You know, Zelensky's victory plan or anything at all?
If you have a pit in your stomach right now, if you have palpitations in your heart, if you're feeling a massive headache, it's because literally billions of dollars right now are being spent to make you feel that way because of the US election. But if we can get past November 5th, there will be this weight lifted off of all of our psyches. We're not going to be assaulted on social media as much. So I mean, it's unbearable for Americans, but I know it's got to be more aggravating for people outside the United States because you have no voice, you have no say. This is a tough one, but we've only got 18 days. However you're feeling right now, come back in 3 weeks and see if you feel any better. I think we will feel better come. You guys don't have Thanksgiving, but here in the United States, we're heading towards the holiday season. Everyone needs to chill out, eat some turkey, listen to some music, meet with family and friends, and I guarantee you'll start feeling better.
Yeah, I think, you know, a few people have asked, what do you think will be the outcome? You know, the election's so close, you know, what's the reality? The polls are so close. And I could wax lyrical about polls and the difficulties of polls, et cetera. But, you know, are you optimistic, or are you on a knife edge, or yeah, how are you feeling about the election?
So Donald Trump only won in 2016 because of really low voter turnouts. So all of the polling, all of the experts, all of the commentators were saying Donald Trump's campaign was over. Hillary Clinton was going to win in a landslide. So people weren't doing anything. People weren't door knocking. People weren't phone banking. People weren't getting out the vote. People didn't vote because why waste your time? Donald Trump was supposed to lose. So Donald Trump lost in 2016. The incumbent always has an advantage. So in 2020, in 2020, people were paying attention. People were engaged. The 2020 election wasn't close. Donald Trump lost by 7 million votes and 70 electoral votes. He needed court challenges in 3 different states to go his way in order to overturn the election. So my opinion is he's not coming back. People are engaged. People are paying attention. The money is being spent. People are door knocking, phone banking, getting out the votes. Historic first day voting in Georgia, 300,000 ballots cast. The Democratic firewall in Pennsylvania is already over 300,000 votes. So all the early indications are good.
Yeah.
Polls don't vote. Voters vote. And I'm looking at the early votes, the mail-in votes, and just the level of excitement and engagement. And in my opinion, at this moment, Donald Trump is toast. If you're listening to this and you have a different opinion, you might live in an echo chamber and you might be just ignoring facts that don't confirm your pre-existing bias. So you're going to be in for a rough morning on November 6th.
So it's really optimistic, but actually, when you look at actual data, so these are people who have voted, it is looking very good for the early votes. So that is definitely something to also that represents enthusiasm, which is a reflection of so a lot of the undecided are people who are deciding whether to vote or not, right? And if you've got a larger proportion of people who are enthused to get out and vote early for Democrats, then that gives you a sense of enthusiasm and a sense of from real data what is going on.
Let me share with this the story that people are not talking about. But the down ballot candidates are being annihilated right now. For some reason, Donald Trump is given a pass because he's been objectively kind of weird and quirky his entire life, going back to the 80s and 90s. His Celebrity Apprentice days in the 2000s, the Comedy Central roast of Donald Trump. He's been granted this immunity for bad language and bad behavior. There are just, for whatever reason, tens of millions of Americans who say, don't listen to what Trump says. I know what he'll do is good in my interest. But when it comes to gubernatorial candidates and congressional candidates and senator candidates, these people are being annihilated down ballot. When you look at the polling of the Senate race in Ohio, Trump's going to win Ohio by a huge margin. But Sherrod Brown, the Senate candidate, is going to defeat the MAGA endorsed candidate. In North Carolina, the governor can't. Do you know about the North Carolina governor race?
Yeah.
The black Nazi guy, his entire campaign staff quit on him.
Yeah.
Ted Cruz in Texas is going to potentially lose his Senate seat when Donald Trump will easily win the state. So it's the down ballot ticket races of Trumpian people trying to talk and act like Trump. It doesn't work unless you're Trump for some reason. So I'm hoping that once again, these wackos who are MAGA crazy down ballot all get wiped out. And,
you've got Osborne in Nebraska's 2nd district as well, who's an independent but will likely caucus with the Democrats, and that's looking good.
That is the winning recipe for deep red states if Democrats want to win.
I think you're right.
Run somebody,
I was going to do a video on this.
Run somebody as an independent, and then they just caucus with the Democrats when they get into the Senate or the House.
Gives Republicans a permission structure to vote for them who would otherwise just not vote for Democrats but don't want to vote. Yeah,
that's how it works in New England with Bernie Sanders, who's an independent, and Angus King, who's an independent. Those are people that don't want to identify as Democrats, but they're still going to caucus with the Democrats.
Yeah,
I think that should be a trend that should be encouraged. I wish more people would just say, hey, I'm an independent. And I think it's a good thing for Americans to vote for people who identify as independent.
Yeah, I think you just then start breaking up the two-party monopoly, if you like, which I think is not representative enough.
I mean, it's still there. It's still there for caucusing purposes, which determines subcommittee and committee rankings and chairmanships. You still have to participate in a 1v1 system for seniority. But yeah, as far as your title and party events or whatever, just do your own thing. Be a good person.
I keep saying, and finally, and then people keep doing nice things. So why 42nd Epistemology Battalion is Douglas Adams reference, and JR was on, that was his idea, and that's excellent. So yes, that is meaning of life. Cheers, JP and Jake. Everyone go get an ATP NAFO patch. That's Chris Ridd, definitely. Thank you for suggesting that again. And the link is in the description below and in the live chat. Finnish guy, if you don't want to front yourself, support Ukraine. Absolutely. Thank you, Finnish guy. Thank you, John Panciotti here. It's incredibly generous from Puerto Rico. Thank you, John. Good to have you on board again. Very kind of you. I sincerely hope you're right, Jake, says Niels Clement. Absolutely. And Dutchy, thank you for the super sticker. My goodness. People, stop being so generous. Ronnie Vranken says, "What are the three countries by sanctions, and who are we at war with? How have Iran and North Korea been under sanctions, and Russia has the?" I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure of the wording there, Ronnie.
So sanctions don't defeat countries. Sanctions are a deterrent. Don't do this, otherwise we'll sanction you. That's the only thing we can do, stick and carrot or whatever. But once you place sanctions on a country, it doesn't really ever lead to the country collapsing or the regime collapsing or the country changing. How long have sanctions been on Cuba? Hasn't changed the government in Cuba. How long have sanctions been on North Korea? Hasn't changed the government in North Korea. A lot of people say that sanctions are harmful because it just entrenches the regime and makes the country more oppressive for its people. But what else do you do? I mean, you tell a country, don't do this, otherwise we'll sanction you. They then do it. You kind of have to follow through on the sanctions. You know, we sanctioned Saddam Hussein in Iraq after the first Gulf War when they invaded Kuwait, and we realized his government was never going to fall. So we then took kinetic action, the second Gulf War, and that turned out to be a disaster. It's like, it doesn't matter what the United States does. It always blows up in our face.
That is the rule. Final question for you is one to do with the NAFO. JP and Jake, both legends. Jake, will you consider going to Kiev to deliver NAFO trucks and drones at any point? Is that something? Last time you were on, we did talk about, you know, whether you would ever get to Ukraine.
Yes, I would like to at some point. I made a decision not to do it prior to the November election because that's like an 8-day journey to get on a plane and then a truck, and then to get on a flight, a truck, a train, a flight, everything included. That's from the West Coast of the United States. That's an 8-day journey for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
that's just a long time to take off YouTube for prior to the November election.
Yeah. Yes. Fair enough. But it is, something I would like to do. I'm hoping maybe next year now. I was planning on sort of going roundabout now, actually, to Ukraine, but it all crept up too quickly because I went in February this year. So I'm hoping to go at some point next year and maybe spend a little bit more time seeing some more of like Kiev and stuff, because I was just all along the sort of frontline areas, just constantly traveling. So it'd be nice to sort of see a bit more of Ukraine, but not, you know, it's obviously difficult. I don't want to be some kind of war tourist. Then on the other hand, you know, if I'm going to be a tourist anywhere, then I'd like to put my money into Ukraine. So
if you're making content, you're not a tourist, man. You're a reporter.
That's it. And that's what I was doing every day. I was making content. So I haven't not made content every single day for over 2 years now. So I don't believe in days off at the moment. But look, Jake, thank you so much. Thank you for the incredible support from the live chat and for the great conversation. Sorry, there are plenty more questions to have asked Jake. It just means that we'll have to talk again, Jake. Thank you for coming on. What any last words from you, good self?
I appreciate what you're doing, and you know, based on all of the donations and contributions, you seem to have a pretty amazing audience. A lot of people out there value your insights and opinions, and I appreciate you once again doing your small part in the bigger picture of the war. Yeah,
absolutely. It is a calling, for want of a better term. Prof. Gerdes in the house is another YouTuber that's part of the team. So thanks. Yeah, hit the like before you go, guys. Great to have you on board, Prof. Great to have you here as well, Andrew Perpetua, and all you great people. Thank you very much, Jake. Stay on the line for a second as we close down. Really appreciate everybody. Take care, and of course, Slava Ukraini.
Glory to the heroes.
Yeah, indeed. All the best, guys.